said that tower number 1 is on fire. The whole outside of the building, there was just a huge explosion.
We have a number of floors on fire. It looked like the plane was aiming towards the building.
Right now, we have an airplane that crashed into the Pentagon. That's what they're saying, it's a plane. And at this time, we've got people who are coming out of the Pentagon who are injured.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. When I left our hotel a little after 7:30 that morning, we were up in, I guess they call it Midtown, about 4.5 miles or so. Our hotel was 1 block from the Empire State Building.
It started in Paris for me. I was on my way back after 3 weeks vacation in France by myself, and I was 6 months pregnant with my first child. And I actually managed to get an upgrade, which never happened to me before, because I had so many air miles on US Airways from coach to business class.
You would like to know why we were in Scotland at the time. And I direct a women's choral group here and sometimes escort them over to Scotland with their husbands too. And we were over there for a choir performance. We had performed the Sunday before in a church, and the church people were very curious about what we were doing there and where we were in Edinburgh. And so they knew where we were residing.
We were in front of the TV for the rest of the day, wondering, hearing from Don, who called, and wondering how Todd would react to it. And when he came home from school, I had never seen him the way he was that day. He was really angry, really upset, really sad, really touched for someone who was 17 years old. 17 years old.
Senior in high school, football team captain, quarterback at Newton High School.
And it was, I've got to go do something. I have to go do something. I have to do something now.
Well, I was scheduled to be at a meeting at the South Tower of the World Trade Centers on 9/11. I was supposed to be there at 9 o'clock, and as per my usual habits, I was running horribly late. So I reached the entrance to the Holland Tunnel about 8:45, and I knew there was a chance I could still make it. I'd be late, but I could deal with that.
When 9/11 occurred, I was a Chief Petty Officer stationed aboard the USS Enterprise. My job on the ship was a quality assurance supervisor for nuclear repairs. And I stood watch down in the propulsion plants as a watch supervisor, and the Enterprise was finishing up I believe around the 5th month of a deployment.
I go to work, to my office, and I work for NASA, and I was in a coffee area, we call it the coffee corner there, and I was getting my tea in the morning, and we have a TV, usually run CNN, news, continuous news in the day, and then I look at the news, everything stopped around 9 o'clock or so.
So I was in the mansion the morning of the attack, And that was routine for me. I always turned the TV on and checked out the news before I went over to the governor's office at the third floor of the Capitol. It was routine. So I turned on the television, and what they were showing was the first tower of the World Trade Center that was on fire. And the reports were hysterical, somewhat hysterical over the news and uncertain about what was going on.
Yeah, I was driving up to campus, and it was probably just a little bit after 9. I was in the back of the school pulling in when I heard the news about the World Trade Center. And I pulled into the parking lot and just sat there.
I had retired from the federal government earlier that year and was doing some consulting work and was going up to New York to visit a client. And so I caught the Delta shuttle, landed at LaGuardia Airport, caught a cab, and was on my way into lower Manhattan.
About 8 in the morning, 8:30. We were going to go have breakfast down at the Downtown Athletic Club. We were staying at the Marriott, which is the Marriott was about 2 blocks from the World Trade Center, and it's in Battery Park.
And so I'm just standing there, and I look up, and there's paper flying everywhere. And I can't figure out, where is that paper coming from? As I was looking at that, one of the guards at the entrance came out and said, "There's been a bomb go off in the North Tower." Then I heard just a low boom. And then, of course, we could see the smoke coming over from the top of the Bank of New York there. Well, the guard came back out and told us, also I recorded the time here was 9:03 when he came back out, and he said a plane just hit the South Tower.
Everything stops and everybody in the office congregate in this area, and I was just all of us standing there in a shock. You know, airplanes hitting the Twin Tower one after another, people screaming. We were just, all of us were like stunned, looking at each other. What's happening? What's going on?
Arthur and I and 2 of our American friends were going to tea to visit some local friends. We got in the cab, and the man said, "Oh, somebody just flew into some building in New York City."
We were halfway across the Atlantic when we had a word from the captain that he was asked by air traffic controllers in Canada to land, but he was very quick to specify that nothing was wrong with the airplane, because that's obviously the first thing that people think about is, oh my God, you know, what's wrong? But he wouldn't say anymore. When we landed, there were already some other big planes, you know, Boeings and Airbuses, parked on the tarmac, which was a little surprising. And actually, the airline never said anything beyond that, what the captain had said in terms of announcement. It quickly transpired, though, that something was terribly wrong in the United States.
At 8:46, I was listening to the radio, and I heard that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And I figured, well, I think it had been hit before. I think it was like a training plane that went the wrong way, or somebody had a heart attack or something, and I figured it was the same thing again. And I figured there would be some damage, downtown traffic would be a mess, probably be some injuries, maybe some deaths, but you know, no big tragedy. But I figured with this going on downtown, I will never make it to my meeting. So I was looking for a place to turn around. Now, if you've ever been to the Holland Tunnel, you know there's like 12 lanes of traffic going into 3. So there's thousands of people everywhere and almost no place to turn around. And then I was still listening to the radio, and after 9 o'clock, 9:03 I think it was, I heard about the other plane hitting, and I knew that it wasn't an accident.
And we ordered our breakfast, and then all of a sudden we heard all these sirens and all this was going on. And so the waiter came out, and inquisitive as an old Irishman is, I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well, as far as we know, we've heard that the World Trade Center's on fire." Then the waiter come back and he proceeds to tell us that he had heard that a plane had hit the World Trade. And so that sort of still didn't shake us up at all. And then about 5 or 10 minutes into the getting ready to eat the breakfast, our whole building starts shaking. And all of a sudden, all this rumbling and all this noise, the second plane was coming directly over our head. And then that's when we didn't know what that was either. But and then I said to them, then the waiter comes running out and he said, "A plane just came over and ran and went into the second World Trade."
And while we were coming in, the cab driver had his radio on. All of a sudden, they broke in with a newscast that a plane had flown into one of the World Trade Center towers. And at that time, at least on this radio station, they thought it was a small plane and it was some kind of an accident. And I don't know which bridge, but it was one of the bridges going into Lower Manhattan. As we came on the bridge, we could see the smoke pouring out of the one tower. And looking in that direction, I saw what was from that distance was a speck. And my first reaction was, "Oh, they've got a helicopter up there looking at the damage." And then we saw it fly right into the second tower, and the big fireball erupt.
Someone somehow made us aware that it was not a small plane; it was a commercial type of aircraft. And it just hit me all of a sudden that, my God, Doug's flying in there today. It just, you know, you drop your husband off to work. We both traveled all the time, and it just dawned on me, oh my God, could that be his plane?
We must have landed about 10:30 New York City time. And we were only allowed to deplane, I would say about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. In the meantime, they just played movies, they fed us, they gave us, I mean, I was lucky, I guess I was in business class because there was everything we wanted, we could have it basically. But when we would ask the flight attendants what's going on, they never talked about the attack. When I started crying uncontrollably, one of the flight attendants took me aside and said, "Ma'am, you need to stop this. You need to get hold of yourself because this is going to be sort of," she didn't say freaking out the other passengers, but that was the idea. And I'm like, well, how can I stop crying when I hear that the Pentagon's been attacked and potentially some friends of ours, you know, have been injured or worse? You know, this is kind of a dramatic situation. She's like, "Yes, I know, but I'm asking you to please, you know, stop crying."
And our center in a few minutes was locked down. Nobody in, nobody out, because it's a federal facility. And the only thing I can think about is go and get the children from a daycare since they're on the base. I couldn't get hold of the high school students to see what's going on in their school, and then call our lovely neighbor there, you know, have you heard anything? It couldn't get through anything. So everything was down for until 11 o'clock. I think I went to my office and everybody, you know, calming each other down, and we didn't know what happened, we didn't know who's hurt, why is this happening. And I was just went to my office and I prayed nobody get hurt and will be the minimum. And I'm not quite sure why I prayed, but I think I felt comfortable praying for myself, for my family, for the people that got hurt.
And so we went inside, we had tea with our friends for about 2 hours, and then we had to call a cab to get back. And of course, during that time, we weren't listening to radio or television. We had to call a cab to get back, and when we got into the cab, there was a lot of radio confusion and people crying and yelling, and the cab driver said something to us about were any of your people involved in that? And we didn't know what he was talking about. And he told us that somebody had bombed Washington, D.C. and New York City. And we didn't know what on earth he was talking about. He brought us to our hotel. He wouldn't accept a cab fare from us because he said we had enough trouble. And when we got into the hotel, the other members of our group were there, and many of them were crying and they were nervous, and they had television sets on, and we were watching it. And two of the women said they had been walking, in our group, said they had been walking through a shopping mall and looking at a television store with a bank of television cameras, and they looked and said, I wonder what movie that is. And then they saw Live from New York across the bottom.
Like everybody, I'm standing there looking at the tower, and couldn't really see very much of the north tower because it was blocked. And like everybody, I did not take any pictures at that point. I just stood there, and when I saw the jumpers, I knew it was time for me to leave. I claimed to be Christian, grew up in the church, and I prayed. But as I was watching the smoke billowing from the tower, it was like a bubble settled over me. It was so real. I never felt fear. I felt protected, and I felt like that above me, where the dark and the light smoke was mixing, and beautiful blue sky. And it was almost like you could see a war between good and evil going on. It was such a heavy presence.
So I found a place to turn around, and I called my boss, and I told him that I wasn't going to get to this meeting. And he said, don't worry about the meeting, we're basically under attack. And I said, okay. So I turned around, and he said, just go home. He says, because he realized at that point that I knew what would have happened if I'd been there. So he just said, go home, and don't worry about it, come in tomorrow or the next day or whatever, I'll talk to you.
After we got to the bottom of the out in the street, we did like everybody else did, and was just looking and gawking like every tourist or whatever you want to call it would do. And you had no idea that anything would progress to what it would get ultimately and later in the day. So on both sides of us, on both streets, police, fire ambulances, everything you could think of was coming past us. So we're sort of in the middle of the corridor. And so we stand there like everybody else does. And then all hell broke loose then. As we learned later, people were jumping out the window. I mean, we're looking at it, but I had no idea that this little blip was actually a human being.
And I knew that I was on the Battery Park side of the towers. So I started down that way because I knew that from there, I knew that there was a Coast Guard station right there at the end, on the south end of Battery Park at the Staten Island Ferry, Coast Guard Marine Safety Office. I don't know, I can't tell you how far from the towers. You saw the pictures, you know, that I was maybe a block south by this time. And I started taking more pictures, and there was a large crowd starting to accumulate between me and the towers. And it seemed like that so many people got to that point and just stopped. Quiet. There was no screaming, no, just quiet.
So then we realized then when the building started falling, to me, it looked like an avalanche. That's all I could think of, but that you see an avalanche on television and you see it building up and you see the smoke coming at you and all of a sudden you're engulfed. That's totally the way it did us. I was standing there and 1 minute I could see everything, the next minute I could see nothing. I knew everything could change then. I had the two older gentlemen. I had two ladies from our office, one lady I didn't know, one lady I did know. I'm thinking to myself, how in the heck are we going to get out of here? And then I said, well, we got to do something. We're at Battery Park. That's right down where the Statue of Liberty boats go out from. So all I could think was, is let's get to the water, because now everything's on fire. The rumors were that a plane had blown up somewhere in Pennsylvania. The rumors were that the subways were all being bombed. The rumors were you could hear glass, you could hear everything just going all around you, so you could imagine anything.
None of us can say for sure if he would have made the Army a career, and our family is divided on that. But certainly once he was in the Army, even as a enlisted man in the National Guard, he was determined he made the right decision. And 9/11 specifically drove him to that decision without question. He was killed at 3 o'clock in the morning Afghanistan time in a night ambush of the 9th. He was on board an aircraft the night of the 9th out of Kabul, destined for Dover. We met him on the 10th. This was incredible. He was the only soldier returned that day with a dignified transfer. What I reflect on 9/11 though was the next day. We drove up, we drove back, we haven't slept. We decided we must go to the we hear word that William and Mary is honoring him and placing a second wreath at the Sunken Gardens, where they read the names of all the fallen, all the people that were killed in 9/11. But now they're going to have a separate ceremony for Todd.
That it would be for my students' generation what the assassination of President Kennedy was for my generation. That we all, I was in middle school, we all remember where we were. And we remember how we felt about it.
And this is the image that I will never forget. I had one of the little rolling suitcases, and I'm walking down Broadway, and there are hundreds of people streaming up Broadway. And not one person stopped and asked, what the hell are you doing? Go the other way.
It's been 10 years, and it still bothers me sometimes. I obsessively watch any special about the towers going down or anything. It's stupid. I don't know why, but I do. It's like you have to know other people's stories.
But the people did this, they were Muslims, that's what the media said, that's what they found out. I felt betrayed by those individuals in my religion. I felt like they really hurted me in my back as a Muslim person. And I think as a Muslim person in America, I think we're never gonna forget that day. Even Muslim, Christian, Jew, anybody will never forget, because it changed our way of life.
As a result of it, that our government has been given a lot of powers that we would not have given prior in the ways of surveillance.
Somehow, in the 10 years, we have lost that sense of unity, of feeling that we're Americans. We're Democrats, Republicans, Virginians, Texans, whatever. But we don't say, first of all, I'm an American. And I don't know why we should have gone from such a time of united strength as a people to such division. I couldn't say why we did, but we have.